Breaking news coming in from Europe. As the negotiations between Russia, the US, and apparently not Ukraine, since they don't really get a seat at the table, are ongoing, the question for NATO is, will NATO exist if the US pulls out? Donald Trump has said multiple times that he will pull out of NATO if the European countries in NATO do not pull their weight. Donald Trump has accused the European allies of being freeloaders multiple times. He demanded that European countries increase their defense spending to the total 2% that is required by NATO, that a lot of countries didn't meet for many years. But most countries have now met that target and have actually set targets for an even higher threshold. Now, if the question is this actually possible? Could Donald Trump actually take the US out of NATO? Technically, yes, it is possible. However, there is an actual law in place. It's called the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, he doesn't need to necessarily officially pull out of NATO to harm their allies in Europe. He could just not really push for any further engagement and activity, and even in any military exercises or practice exercises in the military. Article 5 is really all that matters when it comes to NATO, which states, if an armed attack occurs against one of the member states, it should be considered an attack against all member states. Donald Trump has previously said that he wouldn't protect NATO allies that didn't pay their bills. He said, I would encourage them, being Russia, to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bill. The reality is that now the US, even under Biden, just doesn't want to be the main deterrent to war in Europe. Now, this is a good and a bad thing for Europe. The reality is Europe has an active and quite a strong military industrial complex within itself. What does a Europe or a NATO look like without the US? Well, the reality is that they would actually probably be okay. Of course, the US is the #1 world power when it comes to the military, and it would be a major loss. However, the reality is that the top 5 biggest exporters of defense goods are actually in Europe. Now, the big loss for NATO without the US would, of course, be their massive nuclear arsenal. Now, of course, France and the UK have nuclear weapons, but nowhere near the number that the US has.